Welcome, welcome back to Crafting a Meaningful Life. Once again, I'm Mary Crafts, and I get to be your host today, as every day that we try, not just try, there is no try, there's only do, when we craft our meaningful life. And let me tell you, my guest today is in his 60s, I'm in my 70s, and you better start now crafting that meaningful life. You don't just wake up one day at 80 and say, well, what should my life be like? What am I going to have be my legacy? This is something that we're actively doing really our entire life. And that's exactly what my guest has been doing his entire life, is helping us craft our meaningful life and be aware of the kind of life that we're crafting. So please welcome with me my dear friend, Doug Jessup. Welcome, Doug.
Hello, Mary. How you doing?
Oh, it's so good to have you on. Most people, of course, may be familiar with your face and your name because you've been around in TV and broadcasting for such a long time. Okay, so let's start with that. How long have you been in broadcasting?
Oh, boy. The fall of here it is, 70.
Okay.
It's been a couple days. So I started in radio a long time ago and then did that and then moved over to the TV side and, the rest is history.
Yeah.
But,
well, you've done a lot of things and you've had a lot of different kinds of shows.
Right.
But now that you're really thinking about that legacy piece, you're doing a very different show. And so let's talk about that, what you're doing right now.
Okay. It's called Family Heritage Stories. And it's, I've had shows with my name on it. Yeah, that's not nice. But this is something that I want to leave for behind and hopefully keep running after I'm gone. Because to me, if stories are not passed down from generation to generation, they're lost.
Yeah.
And then those people are forgotten. And you've heard this story, and a lot of people have heard it, but you're going to hear it one more time. I'm 12 years old. I'm a little ADHD kid bouncing off, before they knew what the heck that was, bouncing off the walls. And I had one really great male role model in my life. It was my grandfather. And I'm 12 years old. I get a cassette recorder for Christmas. And I'm interviewing all kinds of people. And my gramps was extremely patient and would tell me all kinds of stuff that my mother didn't even know. And then a couple years later, when I was 19, he passed away. And the last words that my grandfather said on this earth were, "Please remember me." That's what's driven my entire career. Is because, again, I want to make sure that those people are remembered because, it's funny. I originally started as a storyteller. Okay. And I'm going, I'm a young guy. I'm telling stories. Then you get to a point where you go, I've done a lot of stuff, but the people that I'm chatting with, those are the real stories. And that's what's cool because a lot of people, and it's kind of surprising, but let's put it this way. You and I like to be on TV. My wife reminds me, "Hey, Doug, not everybody wants to be on TV." And I'm like, "Of course they do." But, it's funny.
They don't. I can tell you that. A lot of people don't. They don't even want to be on my podcast. They're like, is it video? And they're like, yeah. Like, no, I don't want to do that.
Well, and that's the thing, because to me, everyone has a story. And those stories have power and they help us understand each other. But you do have people who go, So to me, I consider myself a facilitator now. I want to help people tell their stories, even if they don't think they have one.
Whoa. You mean you meet people who, some may not want to tell their stories, but most everyone knows they have a story, right?
Yeah, but it's a matter of getting it out of them because it's, for me, like with the interviewing, it's not the first question that is going to reveal. It's almost more like an onion. And this is where I think the news stuff has kind of missed the boat, is because they're trying to get these little sound bites and everything like that. Where the secret that I found is if you sit down with people and listen to understand instead of listening to respond, you're going to find out you have more in common than you think you do.
Now there is a key for life.
Right.
Yeah. Rather than just listening and waiting until it's your turn to talk.
No, no.
Is it me? Is it me? But to actually listening to what they're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is, it's like when you find out things about, I mean, like even our kids, like, for example, who would know that there was this one lady that, times were tough and, she was on welfare and she was not used to that. She was raised, we don't do that. But, she gets a wagon and she puts her two little kids in a wagon and go around the neighborhood selling cookies.
Yeah.
Okay. And then she ends up building this empire. It's just like, wow. And oh, by the way, people, it's this lady right here. It's Mary. Okay.
That's my story. Yes.
Brandon Fugel. I just had him on the show the other day. People think that, his name's all over the place. The guy started, not kidding, digging ditches.
Yep.
For a phone company and stuff. And, people look at these success stories, and I love to do success stories, but a lot of the time I tease and say these are overnight success stories, 10 years in the making.
Yeah. Oh, at least. Yeah.
So why do you think that stories are important?
I'm kind of with you, Doug, that stories are how we remember things and remember people. If you put a story to a principle or a concept, first of all, they'll remember it. But next of all, they understand it and they feel it here as opposed to just in the brain. You connect their hearts to a story, whereas just a principle or recounting is just done in the brain and we don't connect with it. We don't feel into it. You've heard me speak before and I'm just like one story right after another because that's how they remember a concept.
Right.
It hooks their heart.
Well, there's this little book that people might have heard of where there's this one guy and he talks in these things called parables. Okay. Yeah. There's a reason why the scriptures were written for those people in the ways that they could understand things. And that's, that's an interesting way to look at things. Like my grandfather, this is as close as political, well, maybe as close as political as I'll get. But imagine this, okay? My grandfather was a first generation American. Okay. His parents, I won't say the country, okay, yet. His parents came over from the old country. He was born in Chicago, Illinois. And it's early 1900s. And when he was 8 years old, his mother died of a burst appendix because they could not afford a doctor. Okay? So, number one, nobody in this country should die because they can't afford a doctor. Right. Number two, though, is now he's 12 years old. And his father's visa expires. So now his father wants my grandfather to have the opportunities here in the United States. And so he has to go back to the old country. He never sees his son again. Never. Okay. But my grandfather is put on a train from Chicago, Illinois to Pasadena, California by himself. Okay. By himself. That's a long ride.
That's a long ride. And how old was he?
12.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And he went and lived with his mother's older sister, a single lady that never had any children, and raised him as her own. So, but then you go and say, okay, then you're going to hear a little bit more detail because this story helps understand where I come from and what my principles and values are, because here's the interesting part. He started, and it was during the Depression. And he actually was a chauffeur for Hollywood types. So pretty cool, And so you've seen a couple of my hats. I wear hats. And
you are a hat man.
Yeah, I've got a hat that has his cufflinks in it.
I've seen it. It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, he started dating this beautiful woman, nursing student. Okay. And she had lots of suitors. And then she got polio. Everybody takes off except one guy, George, my grandfather. They get married. He owns an upholstery shop. My grandmother was an emergency room, pediatric emergency room nurse. Okay. They have 2 kids, oldest my mom. When my mother is 14 years old, Florence, Gramps' wife, my grandmother, died from breast cancer. So now here he is. He was, when he started, he was a first generation American. He was raised by a single father for a couple years. Then he comes out to California. He's raised by a single mother. Now he finds himself a single father. That's the reason why I have a lot of empathy for single parents. But it also looks and says, okay, here are people that came to this country for the opportunities, and, they're not criminals. They're, just trying to do the best thing they can. And I really wonder how many people out there have somebody in their generation that came to the United States for an opportunity. Maybe they were from Ireland. Okay. That
would be wonderful. I would love them.
Yeah. And so that's the beauty about this country, is that there's a melting pot where people have come here for greater opportunities.
Wow.
So, but anyway, that's as political as I'll get, and you can read between the lines. But it also explains where I come from and going, okay, because I tease about this. I've done thousands of stories in my career.
Yeah, and for sure.
An FBI profiler would not have a hard time figuring me out, because I'm a blessed guy. I'm the only guy that I know in the business that has gotten to pick and choose every single one of my own stories.
And so that is unusual.
Oh, yeah. So when you look at that, you go, okay, what kind of stories does this guy do? I do a lot of stories about mental health. I do a lot of stories about single parents. I do a lot of stories about autism. I have a lot of stories about child abuse prevention. And I have a lot of stories about success.
Yeah.
And that's because I've lived through every single one of those things. And the reason why people like to watch your podcast is because you can look at things, and everybody's got troubles, but nobody wants to feel alone.
Right.
They go, okay, here's somebody. Oh, that podcast that Mary did, that was meant for me. I really need to hear that message.
I get that all the time.
Yeah. And the whole thing is hope. One word.
Yeah.
Hope. That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you having me on the show to do that.
Well, I'm honored to have you, Doug. And you and I also, of course, have connections with South Valley Services. I think you're on their board. Yes.
I'm not on the board right now, but I do help. Yes.
Yeah.
And I did on them as well. Yes.
They had me speak at one of their events, and you were there. And so we have an affinity. In that case, it was for domestic violence. That's what South Valley supports and provides resources for. But there is this sense about you, Doug, in everything you do, that you care about people, and you want to tell their stories, and you want them to be remembered, like your dad said, like your grandfather said, don't forget me.
Yeah.
And that you have an affinity for people who have gone through struggle, deep struggle, and found their way out. And I sense that that's because it's the path that you took.
Yeah. I mean, let's get real. I mean, peeling the onion, as you will, the domestic violence stuff. I love my mother, but she has not had the best track record in men. And bluntly, my birth father was in prison when I was born. And he was an alcoholic, and, put me in the hospital when I was 3 years old. And my mother put him on a bus and said, that's it, done. Okay. I thought he was dead. about 15, 20 years ago, I actually found him. It was rather miraculous. And it was interesting because the first thing he did, he'd been clean and sober for many decades. First thing he did was to apologize to me. That meant the world.
Yeah.
And so how many people get to meet after that? I mean, it was like 50 plus years,
Yeah.
and you're just going, wow. And then he passed. But it was interesting to be able to make peace, because I admit I carried some baggage there.
Oh, I'm sure.
And then my stepfather was an extremely abusive person. And so I just kind of wish that, and let's get real. I mean, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Domestic violence in the 60s was not talked about.
No.
And there were really no options.
Yeah.
For women. I mean, when people say,
or in the 70s in the 80s, we began to talk about it in the 90s, and now we're shining a light in this millennium because it's no longer something that's men have the right because they're the greater sex. Well, you just don't believe that anymore.
Well, I mean, the thing that I look at is when people say, "Oh, just leave him." Yeah, right. How are you supposed to do that? Yeah. And it was interesting. I interviewed a group in conjunction with the South Valley guys. Was a group called Rough Haven, and these guys actually take in pets in those kinds of, and I hadn't realized it. There was a piece of legislation that basically made it so that pets can actually be included in protective orders. And that's a new thing. It's like, whoa.
I did not know that, Doug.
Yeah. And I was going, more people need to know about that. So that's the whole reason I interviewed these guys. But, but here's the thing there's the difference. When I met my birth father, I was able to find out a whole bunch of other stuff because I have to admit, every time I had a kid, I always wondered because I didn't know half of my medical history and everything and it gets really, really complicated, but my name is not what it used to be. I mean, I was legally adopted and it changes things. Oh yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, so here it is. And I come to find out that, okay, my birth father was an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic that killed his wife.
Oh, yeah.
And because of that, my grandfather, they split the family up, and my grandfather went to go live with his grandfather, which was his father's father, 5 generations, and he was an alcoholic Cherokee Indian. It's like, and so there's a song from Leonard Skinner called Simple Man. And I remember my mother, when I was starting to drink, my mother sat me down and said, here's some stuff that you don't know. I'm going, ooh, okay. And I have a sister that's an alcoholic. And, when you and I were younger, I mean, let's get real. Alcoholism was considered a weakness, what would you call a character flaw.
Yeah.
Now people are realizing that it is a disease.
Yeah.
And, that there are genetic components. Now, admittedly, the other thing I look at it from a mental health standpoint is it doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it does help explain it. And
it also helps with the treatment of it.
Oh, very definitely.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think that's part of the thing. And that's part of the reason why stories should be passed down to say, okay, because like my kids now have heard the cautionary tales. And, having a story is nice and wonderful, but then to be able to say, look, no, I don't think you understand. Let me show you a picture of these people. This is, this is what happened and this is why what happened. But the one thing that I have chosen to do is I do not play the victim card. I grew up relatively, let's say, modest. When I was a teenager, my bedroom was in the garage. I shared it was with a freezer, a dryer. They put a bathroom fan in the ceiling to keep me warm, and it was tile floor. And every time it rained, water would go past my bed. And so I get it. And this is where I guess I've interviewed enough people. There's not too much that surprises me. admittedly, probably the most interesting interview I ever did was, and as far as I know, I'm one of the very few, if not the only person that's been allowed to interview inmates inside the prison. So I interviewed a group of, it was 5 different female inmates. And the only thing that I was told is I could not ask them why they were there. Okay. But, other than that, it's that. But the thing is, whenever you do an interview, and I've interviewed you, people don't realize there's a whole bunch of prep stuff that you say beforehand. It's like, okay, Mary, please say, I know you got, a very, very simple name, but please say and spell your name, blah, 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 so you can get it on the screen. Well, I did the mistake of checking out what these people had done because it's a public record.
Oh, sure.
But yeah. But the reality is none of us are perfect. We're all trying to do the best we can in this crazy world. And the other thing that I think you and I have talked about is you don't know what other people have gone through.
No.
And sometimes, you got to be careful about oversharing, but the reality is I think that kind of helps because, again, here's somebody that you may or may not agree with either politically or religiously or whatever. But I guarantee that you guys have certain experiences and certain values that are closer than you realize.
Yeah. It really helps you walk a mile in someone's shoes, helps you develop that compassion and even empathy piece. That's how I get past, Doug, when I encounter someone or meet someone or someone that I've known for a long time that I just feel like I'm kind of sandpaper with, is if I can just take that moment and just look at them with the eyes of what have you gone through in your life? What brought you to this point? And you see that little child inside that is still broken, or at least coping in a way that's not serving them very well, but they're still just coping. They're like all of us, just coping.
Well, and it's a joke, but let's get real. Every single parent out there is, done enough, stupid things with their kids to have all their kids go to therapy, so.
Absolutely. In fact, my daughter regularly tells my youngest grandson, I'm saving a special account for you for your therapy.
Yeah. Well, what it gets down to, though, and it was interesting. I will tell you, okay, a true story. My therapist, said, okay, Doug, I have never built a house in my entire life. I don't know one side of a hammer from the other. Would you like to hire me to build a house?
Okay.
And he gave that example. He says, okay, think about this. How did your birth father learn to be a father? And so he was raised by an alcoholic father. And again, I'm not excusing behavior, but it does help explain it.
It does.
Oh, okay. Because again, let's get real. Kids do not come with instruction books, and Dr. Spock doesn't count. Okay. And for the people that are Dr. Spock, it's not Mr. Anyway, that's a whole nother. Anyway.
There are probably a lot of people listening who don't have any idea who Dr. Spock is, but Dr. Spock was the renowned authority on raising children and how to treat ailments and physical ailments, but he also dabbled in the emotional elements. And everybody had the Dr. Spock book. I did. I used it when I raised my children, but now you never see it anymore.
Well, and I'm pretty sure that the people from Star Trek ripped off his name. I'm just saying.
Give them Vulcan mind probe.
Yeah, it's like, I can't, it's like something like that. Yeah, anyway.
Oh, yeah? You're in one of those that can't do that?
My wife can do it great. I'm not so much. But
okay.
Anyway. So why do you do your podcast, Mary? What inspired you to start this thing?
I think when I got to a certain age and I began to realize, I've lived a lot of life. And the reason that I am where I am and that I am sane to some extent and that I have been successful and that I am peaceful and I'm loving and I try to be a person of integrity. No, let me rephrase that. I am a woman of integrity. There is no try. Mm-hmm. And it's because I've learned these things along the ways. From all these things that happened to me, I gleaned lessons. And now if I can share those lessons and allow others to share the lessons that they have learned, we can begin to move the needle for some people a little faster. I waited until I was 50 to begin to move my needle. And maybe now through my podcast, I can help someone move their needle at 30 or at 40 or begin to move it at 70, and see that it is possible to heal. It is possible.
Well, there's knowledge. That's one thing. Okay. That's, if you would put it, book smarts. Okay. But to me, I think that the crux of what you and I both love to do is, and it's not to boast or anything, but the reality is with age comes hopefully, wisdom.
A little wisdom.
Taking that knowledge and saying, okay, what do you do with that knowledge and what can you do to help make the world better? Because that's the big thing. I think we all, at least for me, I can say my biggest thing is I want to be able to help make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes it's just making sure that people are seen, heard, because a lot of the time I get to, for the most part, choose, all the people that I interview and everything. And it's intriguing because of those diversity things.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because let me explain what I'm trying to say here is we live in a very homogenized community. And I grew up, in a gang neighborhood in Southern California. And so sometimes I will interview people that people are not used to seeing around here to try to give us different experiences. And then the other thing that I've done now is I go on cruises and I ask people all around the world questions and interview them. And so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because I did this before, but I do it even more now. My favorite question to ask people all around the world, tell me a story about your grandma or your grandpa. And it's an emotional response. Yeah. So I want to hear one.
Okay.
It's your turn, Mary.
This is the story about my grandma, my maternal grandma. And she was not a very attractive woman. Can I just say, now that I look back on it, I never really thought about it when you're growing up, but now, and I see photos of her, she had a very wide nose. Mm-hmm. Looked rather like a black person's nose. Mm-hmm. She had completely bull legs. I mean, just like straight out. Here were her feet, here were her hips, and then there's legs. And she was very tall, kind of gangly. Of course, at the time, she seemed very tall to me. Now that I look back, she was probably like 5'9", which is not very tall now. But at the time, she was taller than my mom and taller than me. But what I knew about her was that she was my grandfather's second wife.
Oh.
And his first wife was her sister. And her sister passed away, left her husband with one son, and he needed a wife right away. Well, she was a good pick because no one had picked her. She was a little bit like Leah in the Bible, and he wanted the other one, but the dad said, first you have to marry Leah. But so he asked her, he said, will you be my wife? And she said yes. And then they had 9 children together, of which my mother was the oldest of those 9. What think now about my grandmother with her bull legs and her big nose is that I never saw my grandfather offer any affection to her. And she came from a place where she wasn't enough because she was the not pretty sister. Married into a relationship where she was second choice. Had 9 children and worked her tail off the entire time. And that was what she thought she was good for. Just work. It didn't matter who she was inside. So guess what she passed to my mom?
What?
You're not enough. It's only about what you do. It's not about what's inside. Get it done. Work hard. And then guess what my mom passed to me? It's not about who you are inside. It's about what you do, what you can get done. What task, what checklist can you check off today? That's your worth. And some point in my life, I began to see this. About 50. And I realized what I had passed to my daughter. And so somewhere in my 60s, I healed it with my mother and my grandmother. And now I've healed it with my daughter.
It's beautiful. The thing I like to see with these kind of stories, again, it doesn't excuse behavior, and sometimes you got to say, okay, it might have been the time or the culture or blood, but the thing is to be able to look at this because those things, those traditions, those values, and that culture is indeed passed down.
Absolutely.
Good, bad, and ugly. It's kind of like, sometimes I tease a little bit, sometimes our roots are a little tangled and a little gnarled. Oh, yeah. But at the same time, I don't know. I want to get your take on this because, you've got on one hand, you could have, what you and I both had. It's like you have experiences, you have trials, you have tribulations, or you have it nice and easy. Of course, nobody does, but, the reality is, what would you rather have? Because I remember asking Brandon Fugel a question. He says, okay, Brandon, you're an extremely successful guy. You've done all kinds of great things. If you could go back in time and change one thing, what would it be? And you know what his answer was?
Nothing.
Nothing. He says, everything I've done has made me who I am.
Absolutely.
And that's where I think that you can get, and that's why I don't play the victim card. It's just like, you can get into stuff and yes, shit's happened. Okay. Excuse me. Beep. But the reality.
We can say that word here. We can't say the other one, but we can say.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. But the reality is that it makes us who we are. I mean, I have a family motto and it's literally tattooed on my leg. Life is never boring.
Life is never boring.
And I'm working on a book, eventually, but yeah, whatever. But the thing that it is, again, it's those experiences. I used to be kind of a control freak because I didn't have.
What? You? What?
When I was a kid, I didn't have any control. Okay. And so I'm going, okay, I want to try to control as much. And I've let that go because here is the thing that I look at. The older I get, let's put it this way. Okay, remember when you were a teenager or you had teenagers and they got everything figured out.
Oh,
okay?
yeah.
In their 20s, they got everything figured out and they're more than willing to share it with you. Okay. Well,
too bad you never got it, Mom.
Yeah, exactly. But the older I get, the more I realize how little I really know.
Yeah.
But more importantly, we really don't have a heck of a lot of control over what happens to us. I mean, and I don't mean to sound depressing and everything, but you don't really have a huge amount of control over what happens because other people doing things in the world. But the thing that you have 100% control of, 100%, is how you react to the things that happened.
Absolutely.
That's the difference.
You must be a Viktor Frankl fan, as I am.
I mean, well, and I'm not as good at it as, I'm better at it now than I was as a kid. I mean, no doubt, and I admit there was a time in my life where I was just mad at God. It's like, hey, I'm trying to do everything I can and I got all this crap happening at home and blah, 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 but then you just get to the point where it's just like, you have to make peace with that. And there are certain people in the world that I just choose not to, hang around with. And that's fine.
Yeah.
But, the other thing is that, you need to also give people a little bit more, what's the word? Wiggle room?
Grace.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, because I remember I interviewed Terry Grant.
Love Terry.
And he's on our board.
Yeah.
And, he had an experience where he and his sweetheart were driving down to their cabin in southern Utah. And they were in a truck and the tire exploded. And the truck turned over at least 3 times,
Yeah.
And Terry was in pretty bad shape, but his wife, oh boy.
I remember this.
She was basically, it turned into a vegetable.
Yeah.
And he adjusted his life so that he could stay home. Yeah. They redid the house, the whole shebang, and she hadn't passed at the time when I did this first interview. And she eventually did. Yeah. But I remember him saying, I learned compassion through that because, there was somebody that came into a meeting late and he says, normally I would have just, ripped their head off. But he says, no, wait a second, for all I know, this is a single mom that, the kid's sick and had to, whatever. That's the things we just don't know. And so
we don't.
His attitude is, we're all just trying to do the best we can and try to give people, the benefit of the doubt.
Absolutely. So. It's a concept, Doug, this concept of grace that I try, there is no try, that I live every day and do my very best at it. I'm not always perfect, but I do my best. And that is that giving grace to others, to have this space where they have had these different trials and had, were born and raised different than I was. And then maybe this, or you never know. And I give them grace to be less than perfect. But it's difficult to give that to anyone else until you've given it to yourself.
Good point.
That I need to give myself grace for being less than perfect and myself grace for sometimes messing up.
Yeah. Well, I admit, I was about, let's call it 30, before I realized, or I don't know if realize is the right word, but let's get real. Okay. Again, I am, for the people that know me, this is like no surprise. I got this little thing called ADHD, and I'm bouncing.
I didn't know.
Oh yeah. And I realize I have a strong personality and I can come out a little strong. And it took me till I was 30 years old till I realized, you know what? Not everybody's going to like me, but that's okay.
That's okay.
I'm going to stop trying to please other people. The sweetest thing is my great aunt. So my grandmother, who passed when she was 40 something years old, her younger sister was our, the great Aunt Millie. And she was basically a grandmother figure for me. And I remember, I was, I'd been married for not a heck of a lot of time, and took my wife and we went and visited with them. And she was 80 something years old. And I remember her, and yes, I'm going to quote this one. Okay. I remember her coming up and saying, Doug, I've gotten to the point in my life where I just really don't give a damn what anybody thinks. And I'm going, good on you, Aunt Millie. And so, I mean, yeah, you need to be
We
conscious.
all have to get to that point, Doug. That's suddenly when you realize what freedom is in this life, is when you don't care or you can let it go.
Let it go. That's the big, and maybe that's the better way to put it, because I think we still need to have manners. You know, to me, I worry about how contentious things are in politics and such right now.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah. On the flip side, you know, this is the one thing I do tell a lot of the younger people, and it's kind of intriguing because. And this is a horrible example, but it's just the best one I could come up with. Okay. So, there are a lot of schools. Okay. There are probably 1,000 schools in Utah. Okay. So just for giggles, let's say there's 50 states last time I checked. Okay. So, you know, I was raised in California, so math is not my major, but that's a lot of schools. Okay?
That's a lot of schools.
So 50,000 plus probably. In the past, there has been some violence in schools involving guns. Okay. And those are horrible. And don't want to diminish that in any way, shape, or form. However, the reason why things are on the news is because that is not the norm. It's not normal for gun violence, because on that same day, 49,999 schools went fine. And again, I'm not trying to diminish, but the point is, when you see stuff on the news, especially because, now granted, this is my one rant, social media, in my mind, has really created lots of situations. I worry about the mental health, especially with the youth, with regard to suicide. And the reality is that there has been a spike in that. And I think a lot of it is because of comparisons or that kind of the social media stuff of trying to compete.
So because I work in teenage suicide prevention, it's one of the things I do. This is a statistic that you will absolutely verify what you're saying. That since 2011. So think about what started and advented in 2011. Teenage suicide is up 70%. 70% since the advent of social media and Facebook started it all. But, and not that I think that social media is bad. I use social media every day. I learn things. I'm engaged with people. The beautiful side of sharing and being open. But there's this dark side of social media that is literally killing people.
Well, and again, it's the yin and yang. Okay, here's something that is good, and it can be used for good. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you know, it's incredible. I think that our grandparents would be just amazed with regard to the internet and to the knowledge.
Oh, they
like, you know, it's funny because I have a fun time interviewing people that when they're over 100 years old and say, okay, tell me the things that have happened in your life. And people, you know, it's like, I interviewed one the other day. It's just like, okay, when the young people wouldn't even know what a party line is. Okay.
Oh, right. Know, I do. I had one.
You know, it's just like, or that they literally had an outhouse. It's like, or it's like,
I didn't ever have an outhouse, but I did have a party line.
And that's the intriguing thing, that how fast technology has moved.
Yeah.
And some of it's for good. There's no doubt. But, you know, it is intriguing to see because, again, I think that it's not the knowledge that is the problem. It's what you do with things. Mm-hmm. And again, it's like, okay, try to use a little wisdom. And, you know, the people that have, okay, I can't believe I'm sounding like one of those people, but the people with gray hair or maybe not so much hair have done some stuff.
You know, a little.
You know, and sometimes even though the problems are different, and I hate to say it, everybody says, "Oh, this generation's got it bad, blah, blah." Okay, again, quit playing the victim card. The reality is that we all have certain things, but we also have certain wisdoms, and it also goes the other direction. I admit, it's like, okay, when I don't have a clue what's going on, sometimes I have to ask my kids or my grandkids, "Hey, how do you do this on this computer?" But
I ask my kids all the time.
But I do kind of know what computers are. I remember, but that's neither here nor there. But you kind of get the idea. But out of all the interviews you've done, what's the thing that when you asked a question, what was the most surprising answer that just kind of you went, "Oh, I didn't know that," or "Really?" Putting you on the spot,
Yeah, I've done over 360 podcasts, so that's a lot of interviews. I think the thing that, Doug, when I look back on it, I'm not sure anything is surprising anymore. I've lived enough life. But what does surprise me is the universality of people, how much we are alike. People think we are so different. What I'm always surprised with is how much we are alike.
Oh, yeah.
And that every single person I interview at some point in their life has been of the victim mentality, poor me. Every single one of them at some point have felt that they weren't enough.
Yeah.
And that is probably the most universal quality, is that we all have to walk through that light, that process of seeing ourselves as we truly are. Our worth has never changed one iota from the day we were born until now. Nothing we will ever do in the future is going to change our worth. It's set. It's beautiful. It's given. And yet we all walk the path of being not enough.
And I wonder, to me, again, it kind of comes back down to, my Aunt Millie. It's like, why do people give the power to other people to tell me what I'm worth? No. Doug doesn't play that game anymore.
I'm so glad.
It's just like, Mary is an incredible woman. She's done all these great, wonderful things. But you know what? That doesn't matter. The person that is, looking in the camera here is, she's good enough because she knows she's good enough. You don't need me to tell you.
Right.
And, nor do you need to listen to those people say, "Oh, can you believe what that person wore?" Or blah, blah. I mean, that's the thing on television. I look at a lot of the gals that I've worked with over the years, and bluntly, men and women in the broadcast business are treated differently by the public. If you admit it or not. Yeah, because Nisha has helped, with my show a fair amount. And she and I have had some pretty deep conversations. And some of the negative comments that people will get, because let's get real. This is a funny little thing. And, I'm asking a woman here to see if you agree with me. But my observation is that men dress for women. Okay. Women don't dress for men. Women dress for other women.
Oh, now there's a good observation. Okay. I think that there's a lot of validity to that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, it's funny. When I first got on social media, I admit, I wasn't a big fan of social media. I had maybe 30 followers or something like that, And then I started, one of my TV franchises is probably 10 years ago or something. And the news director said, "Okay, Doug, here's the deal. I know you don't like social media, but you are now required as part of your job to post every single day."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's more work than people think. Okay. Number one.
It's, yeah.
Oh gosh. And so
I know because I do it.
Yeah. And I wasn't sure what the crap I was doing. And so I maxed out at like 5,000 followers in like a month. And then I started getting some interesting messages that I had to show my wife and said, honey, I have no idea who this woman is.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
This is not, and as much as I got, the stuff that the ladies would get,
Oh, it's unbelievable.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so
Your
that's why-
smile is just mesmerizing. I never seen anything quite like it. I don't even know you, but I couldn't take my eyes off you. Oh, please.
Well, whatever, get a life. But we go into the weeds there.
Yeah.
But it is, it's interesting because, again, the reason why my why has changed over the years. Okay. My why used to be, it's like, okay, bluntly, I had a cancer scare a number of years ago. And so I learned, 2 lessons, and this one I do have to, change the language because it would get bleeped. But basically life is too short to work with, let's just call it idiots. Okay. And that was my number one. And number 2, what are you going to leave? What do you want to leave behind? And that's kind of where my life really changed.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, and you tell me, and again, this, when I turned 40, no big deal. It's like, okay, 40 times 2, 80. Yeah, I can probably make that. No problem. Okay. When I hit 50, I'm going, well, let's see. My aunt, my great aunt, my great grandmother, and my great uncle, they lived to 98. So yeah, I might make it. I'm not sure I want to, but I could. Okay. Then when you get to 60, you go, okay, there is a snowball's chance in hell that I'm going to make it to 120. So what do you want to get done in the window that you have?
Yeah.
And fortunately, again, my whole career, I've said I want to do this, 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 and this. Right now, I'm living the dream. I've got my own TV show. That's great and wonderful, but it's doing the things. I want to make sure that people are having those conversations with their kids and their grandkids and their grandparents. And, my grandkids know me. Okay. They live with me, etc. Okay. But it's my job to make sure that they know the story about my gramps, my grandfather, so that he is remembered. That is a big crux of my why.
That's your big why right now. Doug, it's hard to believe, but do you know we've talked an hour? An hour we've talked. And of course, that is not in my time frame, but I could talk to you for another 30 minutes. So we probably need to think about having you back on the show. Okay. But what I want my listeners to do is, first of all, you run and founded the Fedora Foundation, your hat, which is the preserving of those stories. And you have a show every Sunday night that people can go on and hear these stories and remember people. It's your goal in life to make sure that people are remembered, and not just for nothing, but for remembered for the things that mattered to them. And you're recording those stories. You're getting them down. It's not only just sharing your story. Your vision now is sharing everyone's story.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, the mission statement or mantra or whatever you want to call it.
It's your mission statement, and I love it.
It's really simple. Helping heroes and heritage be remembered through stories.
Yeah.
That's simple.
And realizing that are not we all heroes in our own liking? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Doug, thank you for being on here today. I will include the links so people can find you on your social media that you don't post on. The link to the Fedora Foundation. And of course, the link to the show so they can, watch it and find out more about you. And I'm just honored that you were here today, and I'm honored for my friendship with you. And you've taught me so much about the value of recording stories. I tell stories, but the recording of them and the preserving of them is is the important piece.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks again, Doug. And may to all of you use this bit of beautiful time that we've had with Doug to craft your own meaningful life, to discover your own legacy, and to make sure that it's recorded, not only for you, but for your children, your grandchildren, and for everyone. That's how we become always remembered. Namaste.
Crafting a Meaningful Life.